like it is to be sung by the the best of the singers or the best of the musicians. So it gives a little bit of elevation maybe to the 140th Psalm. But here's another connection that we have with the next three Psalms, 141, 142, and 143. Even though Psalm 144 is a Psalm of David, 140, 41, 42, and 43 are all going to be common because they're going to relate, maybe not specifically, but common circumstances, struggles. In fact, Psalm 140, the first 5 verses, you get the idea of like an animal that is being hunted by a predator. So you kind of get the idea that he's really dealing with a very difficult situation in his life. For David, that could have been when Saul was pursuing him. And Saul did pursue him relentlessly. He was outnumbered. Saul was king. He had to hide in caves. He had to hide in the wilderness. So it was a difficult, troublesome, suffering. He felt like an animal being pursued. So here's the question. Not all these Psalms are easy to stick in what they have as Psalms of worship. But when you get to the end of Psalm 140, it's almost like it ascends. It starts out like an animal being pursued and ends as a man praising God. So it goes from like the low point to a high point. But it doesn't give you any indication, the Psalm, that like he's out of the trouble. So here's kind of the thought when it comes to, here's a Psalm in the worship Psalms, but it's in the middle of a crisis that's still a crisis. But he's still worshiping God. So I think that's kind of the emphasis maybe of this psalm, that even when God is our God, and he is, and he emphatically states that in verses 6 through 8 of this passage, where he claims confidently that God's my God, and since he is my God, I still have something to praise God for. So it's a psalm in the worship psalms, but it's in the middle of a trial, teaching us that even in the middle of a trial, we can still worship God. And again, it does speak to our spiritual level if the only time we praise God is when things are going great. It kind of speaks to where we are spiritually speaking. If we can still worship God when things are going really tough, then it's showing that we're growing in our spiritual lives. So there is a real theme in this psalm, and that's kind of where I titled it, Deliver Us from Evil. In the first 5 verses, you'll get the picture here in a minute when we dive into the text. So again, the psalmist is emphasizing worship, but worship and praise in the midst of a difficult, troublesome trial. And so I'm just kind of calling this Deliver Us from Evil. In fact, the very first phrase of verse 1, Deliver me, O Lord, from the evil man. So you get the picture. And for the first 5 verses, and even verses 9 through 11, he's going to talk about that evil individual. Never names him, so we don't know if it's Saul. It could be Absalom. It could be Doeg. It could be so many individuals in the life of David. He had a lot of enemies. Being a king, being a Goliath slayer, he had a lot of enemies. So it doesn't really mention who is the evil man, but he is asking God to deliver him from evil. But here's something I want you to put in the back of your mind. When you hear this, deliver me, O Lord, from the evil man, does it kind of not remind you of the Lord's Prayer when the disciples were asking Jesus, teach us to pray? And one of the things that he gave them in the element of our prayer, it's not like we got to repeat the Lord's Prayer, but it's not like it's a bad prayer to repeat. It's not like you can't repeat the Lord's Prayer and it's a bad one. It's a good prayer. But remember, it gets more than give us this day our daily bread. Do you remember it? Deliver us from evil. Lead us not into temptation. So here's another element of this psalm, and even 41, 42, and 43. Not only do we need to be delivered from the evil that's outside of us, we also need to be delivered from the evil inside us. I'm a believer. I've been saved. I've been redeemed. One of the things that it brings up in the 140th Psalm is this man would use his lips, the evil man would use his lips to try to destroy the righteous man David. Sometimes even believers can use their lips to destroy a righteous or an unrighteous individual. We have evil inside us too. So again, this could be a psalm that David's writing because there's a real person that's trying to destroy him. God save me, help me, deliver me, strengthen me, preserve me. But he could also be thinking, God, I've got evil in my own heart and I need to be delivered from that too, like Jesus asked us to pray. And before we dive in, if you go back to Psalm 139, and again, remember, Jewish people were placing these psalms. Listen to the last two verses of 139 that we saw a couple weeks ago. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So right before you jump into Psalm 140, and he's saying, God, there's a particular individual, Saul, Doeg, Absalom, whoever it is, or a host of enemies, the whole Philistine army with Goliath in front of them. Deliver me from that. He's also got in his mind, deliver me from me. Because he'll talk about some of that stuff in here. So let's dive into 140. And I've got it divided up in 4 little sections, and here's the first one. And I'm just calling it David's petition. And we're going to see 2 petitions in this psalm. David's petition. And the petition here is, deliver me from evil. He calls it the evil man and the violent man. So he uses both of those terms in these first little series of verses, 1 through 5. The evil man and the violent man. And the idea there that he kind of goes from the evil man, the evil individual, and that's who the individual is, whoever they are, it's one or it's many. The evil man is a violent man. He's an evil man, so that evil turns into violence. And we know that Saul not only tried to kill him when it was just Saul in maybe a hall where David was playing his harp. You remember that aspect? And remember he threw a javelin at him? I mean, that's one-on-one trying to kill you. Or it's David running for his life in the wilderness of Zin in the cave of Adullam, and you got a whole army of people coming against him. So the evil man is not just some evil man that's like got evil in his heart. That evil turns into violence. And his response in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the rest of this psalm is to go to God, talk to God in prayer, to get help from God, to get the remedy from God. You know, you can honestly say every time in our lives, everything that we do or accomplish, it's all Jesus, it's all God. But sometimes it's very obvious. If we don't get God's help, we're not going to get help. So it's pretty obvious in this passage that he was in a situation against someone. Let's just say maybe Goliath on the back story here. Can you imagine how David felt? I don't think he was afraid, because he seemed pretty confident when he walked down in there with a sling and some stones. You know, he seemed pretty confident, but it was very obvious that he was outsized, right? 10'6", 9'6", whatever it was, 10, 11 foot tall guy, you know, and he was a kid. He couldn't match him by muscle. He couldn't match him by strategy. He could probably run around for a little while and the guy would have caught him or whatever at some point. So you get it. He realized that whatever these situations were, and really any situation, we need the Lord's help. And he mentioned several things. Deliver me. Preserve me. So again, he's asking God to intervene. He's asking God to step into this situation. And later on, we'll see that God's interested in all of our situations. Notice in verses 2 and 3, he says, which imagine mischief in their hearts. Continually are they gathered together for war. So you kind of get the emphasis that it's not just Saul, but this could be Saul and his armies as they're chasing David and trying to find him in the wilderness of Zin, the cave of Adullam, wherever he's at. They have sharpened their tongues like a serpent. Adder's poison is under their lips. And those are verses that you see not only in Romans 3, but you also see in Proverbs. These individuals that are after David are not happy unless they're planning and plotting evil against him. It's in their heart, but it's also in their hands. It's in their plans. It's in their devices. They have permanent opposition to do him harm. Their words, he says, sting or pierce like a serpent. You know, you can't sharpen your tongue, so it's an illustration that their words inflict pain. The Bible even references that in Psalms, not only that, or in Proverbs, not only that our words are like the bite or the sting of a serpent, but it's like the cut of a knife as well. So first 3 verses, he's just reminding us of what this evil man does. Verse 4, he says, keep me, O Lord, from the hands of the wicked. So he's getting a little further, not just from their exterior, one time he was in the cave of Adullam, and him and Saul had a conversation, and Saul came in the cave looking for him. Remember, David didn't show himself, and then Saul goes back out, and then David revealed himself, and Saul kind of had a little revival moment. Didn't last long, but had a little revival moment. So he's just saying, keep him from getting his hands on me. Not just his words. You know, those words are hurting and painful. But he says, don't let him get his hands on me. Keep me, O Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Preserve me from the violent man. Now, here we kind of, the latter part of verse 4 and verse 5, we kind of get into the mind of the evil man and the violent man as to what his purpose is here. And just look at it with me in verse 4 and then all of verse 5. Who have purposed to overthrow my goings. So here's their intention. Now again, this could be Ahithophel, who was doing conspiracy stuff behind David. This could be Absalom at the gate. Remember, he didn't like the way his dad was ruling, and it wasn't long till he usurped his authority, and David had to go on the run. This could be Saul. But whoever this is, or whatever he's reminding us of, is they didn't like the path I was on. They didn't like the life I was leading. And so they were trying to overthrow. So whoever these enemies were, they were trying to overthrow his life. Verse 5, the proud have hid a snare. Now I just want you to notice in this text, the different things it mentions, devices. Now again, these are words used to catch an animal, but David's using these words to illustrate how the evil man, evil devil, our evil flesh, will snare us. He uses the word snare. The proud have hid a snare for me, and cords. They have spread a net by the wayside. They have set gins, and that's another word for traps, for me. So let me just remind you again of the bigger picture here. There's an individual, whoever it might be, that's setting snares and cords and nets and traps for David to stop him, to diminish his integrity, to hurt his character, to stop his progression. There's somebody really trying to do this kind of stuff to David, and he's being hidden and sneaky about it. The snare and the net and the gins and the cords are all things you would not naturally see. They'd blend in. They're deceptive. And doesn't that remind you of how the devil works? I mean, it's how the devil works. The devil will work in your life, and your flesh sometimes will give in to those things. So again, this reminds you of what the devil does in our life to trap us. The snare has the idea of even on your normal, usual path. You know, Proverbs tells us, and we can't do a lot of back and forth or we'll be too long in the passage, but we try to stay just right in the passage. But if you go into Proverbs, it talks about when you're on the path of the righteous, it tells you to not even look at the other direction. I mean, if you're thinking about an exit off the path of the righteousness, don't even think about that. It says don't turn, don't look, don't even gaze on it. But what this reminds us, even on the path of the righteous, on the planet, because of our own flesh, even that's not completely safe. You get off the path then you have much more chance of being caught. The word cords, net, and gins is like when you get off the path or you begin to go the wrong direction, then it pulls the net and you're trapped. So you get the idea. The intention of the evil man is to catch David, to ruin David, to destroy David. And I'm just reminding you tonight, the devil's not your friend. The devil's your enemy, and you know that. But he'll use stuff in the world to ruin you. And hear me, he'll use good stuff. He'll use good stuff to get you in a bad place. So again, this psalm is talking about a real individual, and he's going to God for deliverance and preservation and keeping and protection. But we too need to be aware of what's going on in our own life and the devil around us and enemies as well. Now look at verses 6 through 8, David's profession. David's profession in verses 6 through 8. I said unto the Lord. Now again, he's still in this prayer mode, going to God. You know, I like how it says, I said unto the Lord. Let me give you two things about enemies. Now sometimes we have real enemies that are pursuing us. You know, maybe trying to slander us, ruin us, hurt us. You have to be really careful how you handle that. We've always got the devil after us, hunting us like prey. That's always happening. Here's some things to think about. One, don't talk so much to the individual that's after you. Like he never tells us, I had a sit down with Saul. Now he talked with Saul on the ledge of that cave that one time, but he never tried to coerce Saul. He never spent hours talking to Saul, begging Saul, pleading with Saul. Who did he plead to on a regular basis? His God. The only people that can change hearts is God. Not to say that you shouldn't have conversations, but you should have a whole lot more conversations with God than your enemy. The second thing, don't ponder so much on their attacks. And that'll bring you down. So what he does is he talks to his best friend. He talks to his God. So let's dive into this. I said unto the Lord, thou art my God. I'm not going to get hung up on who's my enemy. I'm going to get hung up on who's my God. And my God, hear the voice of my supplications, O Lord. Listen, your voice is heard in heaven. The wicked's isn't. Your voice is heard in heaven. Your relationship with God gives a voice to you, to God. O God the Lord, the strength of my salvation, thou hast covered my head in the day of battle. He's looking back at the many deliverances of God in the past. And that encourages him. And that encourages us when we see God do stuff for us yesterday. Grant not, O Lord, the desires of the wicked. Back to the present. Further not his wicked device, lest they exalt themselves. Back to verse 6. The ground of David's appeal was his relationship with God. The God of the Bible was his God. That's his hope. That's his help. That's his confidence. He calls it his strength of his salvation in verse 7. You know, there's nothing more amazing, and there's nothing we should ever get over this fact that God is our God. I want you to think about this for just a minute. It's amazing, but not near as amazing as what I just said, that we are his. Honestly, everything is his. Lost people are his. The cattle on 1,000 hills are his. He made all of it, right? You know what's amazing? Is that the God of the universe belongs to me, to you. God made that declaration early on in his establishment of a relationship with man. The guy's name was Abram, and you remember the verses. We saw them just a few weeks ago. What did God say to Abram? Not, you belong to me. That's already a given. Everything belongs to God. But what did he say to Abraham? I will be your God. He's my God. And he's yours too. And that's why I have a voice. That doesn't mean I get everything I want, but it means I can tell him, ask him anything I want, and trust him to do what's right. That's why in verse 7 he's remembering what God's done for him in the past. He remembers the cave of Adullam and saving him so many times from the sword of Saul. And he was outnumbered and overpowered. He remembers that day down in the valley of Elah when he stood before Goliath, way bigger, way more, have more ability, deep, crazy voice. Don't know what he sounded like or looked like. But they were no match for David's God. And David knew that. But David also knew that God allows different things in people's lives. So in verse 8, he's asking God to be merciful. Don't let this evil man do what he wants to do in my life. Don't give him or allow him to have the upper hand. You know, the Lord may allow in his providence things that we don't understand, but we can pray for it to be changed. We can pray for God to be merciful. I'll just give you one quick story, and then we'll dive into the last verses. You remember we talked about the thing with Absalom. Maybe that was one of the things that he's thinking about in this passage. Absalom has come to power, and David's had to go on the run. And I don't know if you remember the story. He's on the run, and he's just making his way out of the city. You know he's got a heavy heart. His son has just turned against him and just taken his kingdom. So he's brokenhearted because it hurts inside the family, and then he's just brokenhearted because he's running out into the wilderness. I don't know if you remember the story, but there was a man named Shimei. He's cussing, and he's kicking rocks at David. Now, I don't know if you remember the story completely, but Abishai said, you just give me the word, and I'll cut his head off. You just give me the word, David, and I'll go over there and shut his mouth. I will slice off his head. Now, that's on the way out of town. And if you'll go back to that passage and read that entire story, David says, nope, leave him alone. And I'll just put it in like just basic words. God is teaching me something through this because I've had my own mess ups. There's providence at work here. So the man cussed, and the man kicked dirt, and David went out into the desert. He even said in that same part of verses, I don't know if God will let me come back to the kingdom or not. But if he does, praise be to God. What's David saying? I don't know what's going on here, but I trust your providence. So he's just reminding us in this text that God sometimes providentially allows us to go through things that are difficult. But God can still be praised. Look at verses 9 through 11. Here's the second petition. David's second petition, and this is judgment on evil. Here's where he's basically telling God, I want you to judge this evil man. And again, this is okay. You remember that story that I just referenced a little bit ago? Saul came into that cave alone. Remember what David did? He took his knife and cut off a little corner of his garment and kind of waved it at him up on the ledge there and said, I could have killed you, and I didn't. So he never took God's vengeance in his own hands. But it's okay for us to ask God to be just on the wicked. It's okay for us to ask God to be righteous on the wicked. As for the head of those that compass me about, let the mischief of their own lips cover them. As you covered me in the day of battle, you cover them with their own mischief. Their plans that they had for me, you bring it back on their head. Let burning coals fall upon them. Let them be cast unto the fire, into deep pits, that they rise not up again. One writer said that when the righteous fall in the pit, they always come out because God brings them out. When the unrighteous fall in the pit, they'll never come out. And he's saying, God, let them fall in the pit they planned for me, and let them be burned by the fire they planned for me. Let not an evil speaker be established in the earth. Evil shall hunt the violent man to overthrow him. Two real interesting things in verse 11. Evil men may be prominent, and again, this didn't come from me. I read this out of a book, and it's really good. Evil may become prominent, but it will never be permanent. Isn't that good? The Hitlers, and whoever's, they might be prominent, never be permanent. The latter part of verse 11, evil shall hunt the violent man to overthrow them. You know what sin is? Sin is the evil man's own punishment. It's like having a disease that'll kill you, and you're feeding it every day. His own evil will hunt him and destroy him. So David's petition here is judgment on evil. Last two verses, David's worship. Here's where we get to where this is a worship song. And these are two great verses. And again, we have gone all the way from a hunted bird or a hunted rabbit to a man dwelling in the presence of God. That's pretty good, right? A man starting out way at the bottom and ended up way at the top. A hunted bird that's helpless and hopeless, and the snare is around every curve and in every valley. But you end the psalm in the presence of God. That's a great way to end it. Look at verse 12. I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted and the right of the poor. God's always going to maintain and be merciful and be compassionate on the righteous. That doesn't mean we're not going to be under trials and afflictions and difficulties at times. But we will be brought through and never be forgotten. Verse 13, surely the righteous shall give thanks unto thy name, the upright shall dwell in thy presence. It tells us two things about the righteous going through trials. They will give thanks. They will give thanks. And you can read, if I can encourage you, I think it's 2 Samuel 23, maybe 24. It's a great passage from David when David's talking about how his life didn't really turn out like everything he wished for, but that God had been faithful and God had been merciful and God had satisfied him. The righteous will give thanks, and the upright shall dwell in thy presence. You know, I don't know what our immediate future is going to be, and I mention this from time to time. I don't know what, your little ones are going to look at when it comes to the world 25, 30, 50 years from now. I don't know this. But I know this. God will always be interested and invested in the righteous. Secondly, we will dwell in the presence of the Lord. I mean, that's the one promise that we all have. No matter what happens down here, ultimately and eventually, we spend eternity there. And I'm just telling you, I'm a believer in this. 5 seconds there will wipe away if you live to be 100 years here. It might be less than 5 seconds there will wipe away anything that we've been burdened by or tried by or afflicted by here. Just a few moments there. We might be the hunted bird, but we're the hunted bird that will be delivered and strengthened and cared for and protected by God all through life. And at the end of life, we end up dwelling forever in the house of the Lord. That's our promise. All right, let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll take a few prayer requests tonight. Father, thank you again for your word. Thank you so much for the Bible that we have to read. And as I've said it many times in the book of Psalms, we get to dive into the life of David and see some real stuff, real life stuff, him going through some real stuff that we go through. Tonight, remind us that we have a God who cares. When we are opposed and threatened and persecuted from the outside, by evil on the outside. But God, even tonight, help us to be reminded of the stuff inside us, our flesh, that has a tendency towards evil. God, that you would help us to not be diverted from the path, but to stay on that path. But to always be aware of what Paul says. You better have on the whole armor of God, because there's a devil out there that'll use all kinds of snares and nets and cords and gins, traps to destroy you. Not to take you to hell, but to ruin your life. So God, help us as we look into these Psalms to see real help for our daily walk. And we ask these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen. All right, let me get